Debbie, Lois, when we got to church every Sunday, we pray. And one of the things we've been praying about is being bold when we need to be bold, sharing the gospel. And I was doing something really cool. Mom always says, I put up a 55. Why am I here? What is the purpose of me being here? Well, when she was sick, after she came home, she had to have physical therapy. She's been witnessing to the physical therapy. First off, I love how she did it. First off, as she would come, she's talking about, church and stuff like that. Just talking about church. And then do you go to church? And even, does go to church. But she still thought, well, I think it's a Catholic church to be does go to. The next thing, last week, she said, do you know Jesus? And I just want to hope she progressed and just each time talked a little more, sharing the gospel with him. It was a wonderful thing. And God says in his word, whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned. We need to share the gospel with everybody. We all know our time is short here. We need to be bold. We have the opportunity to share. Sometimes it might not be, telling them the gospel. Maybe it's just doing things for other people. Maybe it's just loving them. Whatever it is, we need to be open to what God wants us to do. The Holy Spirit can work through us mightily. We just have to be willing. What's that, Lord? Okay. I understand we're going to have John talk to us about how do we know when God is speaking to us. Can we give him a warning round of applause?
Good morning. I love how this is my lower church. We talked about that once before. We're glad to be here. It's a wonderful place to eavesdrop on conversation between Dolores and God. And just appreciate her story afterwards about how somewhere in the life of her to remember that she has a continuous conversation with God throughout the day, affecting her whole life. And a great model for us. And this is why we're presenting this topic today, that share and remember positive exhortation. Again, it's exhorting you to converse with God regularly, today, throughout the day, throughout your life. This is how he wants us to communicate with him. And he has a voice that he wants us to listen to. And it comes in a variety of ways. And those are the reasons why we want to look a little bit today about how we communicate with him. How do we know him? And how do we verify that it isn't our self-talk and God speaking with us? I ask you to look around the room and recognize all the empty spaces. If they're empty, I think, as you know, because people are working on an assignment from last week, developing their notions about what their spiritual gift was. I was going to suggest when we were called to prayer to pray over those people who are here, who made a very difficult decision to stay at home and work on their assignment, than to come today. So, as you see those faces, just remember, they're at work and God's working on them to reveal himself in a deeper way to them. I was reminded this morning just how difficult it is to hear God. When I was reflecting on this morning on the presentation, and as I felt a need to just be silent before God and to listen, to take in his presence and to be close to him. As I was trying to reflect and just be in God's presence, I was reminded how difficult it is for us to do that during the day. To take time to push away all the clutter, all the distractions, character in it, how they must have had these marvelous, deep, intimate relationships with God throughout their lives. Because when we read the interaction between God and the prophets and the kings and the judges and the wonderful people in the Old and New Testament, we see that these are conversations that are so easy for them to have. They must have an intimate relationship with God that they have developed for years and years and years. And we get a little snippet of that when we read about those encounters. We're going to look at some of those again interaction today as a reminder of how God communicates with us. Well, how do we know God's voice? How do we differentiate that voice from our very own? There's a lot of me as that stuff typing all the time. And I'm never sure when this was God speaking to me or whether it was simply God talking to himself, talking forward to himself, or he's trying to justify the next course of action. And that's when I struggle, and why I wanted to share not my struggles with, but some solutions, I believe, some 5 steps, 5 ways of going about nurturing this relationship with God so that you recognize when he is communicating with you. And if you don't, how do you verify that the voice you hear is his? And so looking back into that question, then, how do you in this moment? I ran across a poem that Amy Carmichael wrote. Some of you may recognize her. She was a missionary, struggling for most of her life with extraordinary pain, arthritis, degenerative arthritis, nerve issues that kept her in this extraordinary pain condition all her life. And yet, she grew into an intimate relationship with God. Not a dependent one, but one that was put alongside of him. And she did a prayer for him that I'd ask Pam to read to us as our opening prayer, because it reminds us of how we set ourselves outside, our voice towards God, and take your word for this thing.
And shall I pray thee change thy will, my Father, until it be according unto mine? But no, Lord, no, that never shall be. Rather, I pray thee blend my human will with thine. I pray thee hush the hurry and eager longing. I pray thee soothe the pain of keen desire. See in my quiet places with his stronging. Forbid them, Lord, purge the foolish fire.
It's a subtle, isn't it? To purge those fires from our own thoughts that creep in and are the directors of our life and totally release ourselves to the Word of God. And this is what we're about today. As a psychologist, I'm always interested in motivation. What drives people to do what they do? And it seems to me that one of the primary drivers, the motivations we have, is to predict and act on the future so that everything comes out right for us. So we're constantly feeling anxiety about what's going to happen next. And we're trying to make it work out on the road. So it's not unusual then for us to be driving forward on the future, making it work. Ironically today, I thought of an example of this, and the example is looking at God as though we were approaching the Wizard of Oz. Very interesting that you choose that concept. How often do our prayers then and our messages with God continue to attempt to influence him to be the great Wizard of Oz, getting us all back safely to our home? And that's the reason why I picked it, because my prayer oftentimes is, Lord, search my future so it works out best for me. And I'm telling you, I'm giving him directions on what I need, and simply to ask him to go poof, and it happens. I get my slippers back on, and I'm off to Kansas. Curiously, incidentally, that story, I think as you know, is a product of Michigan. The author of Bob wrote that over in Holland, and all the versions of it. And if you're interested in that, they're now putting on tours to go see where that was developed. So we are talking about a Michigan product. Thank you for singing it. Singing thing than to be telling God what we want and two, pushing his answer off to the side because we're already knowing the answer is the one we can prove. And yet, a guy by the name of Chuck Swindoll, who I consider one of the finest Bible teachers of all time, and I think he's in his mid-90s now as well, was oftentimes asked by people, how do I know what the will of God is for me? And he answered, I think they're asking the wrong question. The real question is, what will you do when you know it? How willing are we to accept what God is speaking to us and act on it? Stepping out boldly, as we heard this morning with Rick talking about his mother-in-law, speaking out to and witnessing to that individual. When we are prompted by God to do just that, using our spiritual gifts in particular. So Chuck gives us an insight and a deep understanding then about what it means to engage God. Be willing to get answers, to receive messages from Him that call for us to act, not just to sit back in a pew and go, oh, no, which I think was one of the worst words in our vocabulary. Come along, wait till tomorrow. Well, if we wish to know what God's voice is and to seek guidance from Him, there are really two kinds of approaches to that. And I want you to listen to this because if you have an assumption about the first kind, which we call mechanical, God's voice is mechanical, then we may disagree with this wrong. To be mechanical, God would simply use the television clicker in your hand to change the channel. If you say, Lord, make me a better person, click, He would say, bingo, you are now changed from one channel to yet another. And so God doesn't really work that way. The second form of counsel then is counsel, where the assumption is that He has given us a brain, and as Paul talked about, a renewed brain every day, renewed by the Holy Spirit, by the knowledge of God, through the reading of the Scripture in prayer and in meditation and reflection on Him. So God's expectation is that He has given us a brain to use, and that He is helping us, standing alongside us, to show us and to guide us and lead us, yet still allow us to make a decision about whether or not to accept His guidance or not. But ultimately, God's messaging to us is designed to give us the freedom to act as though Jesus did act, to live the lifestyle that Jesus lived. And all along He's prompting us through our lives as we stay with Him and take in and drink in His messages and showing us how to live Christ-like lives. So because of it, we're free, not like He is apparent to us, guiding us and telling us what to do, but giving us the freedom to serve with a brain, with a mind that is constantly nourished with His Word. That's the kind of concept then that we're looking at and how we are created with Him. I think there are many difficult life-changing decisions that we would have to confront, not only every day, but just periodically. A job search, home purchase, moving to a new location, marriage. And all of those fall apart as we have developed this intimacy with God that we can engage Him in the conversation and invite Him into the decision and listen and take in what He has to tell us. Oftentimes, I'm working with individuals who are saying, what is God calling me to do? And that is the struggle a number of us are asking, much like we're asking, what is our witness? What is my calling? And yet we don't really know whether this is God's speaking or somebody else giving us true advice. So we're asking you not only to deal with these biblical questions and these decisions that are life-changing, but also just day-to-day living relationship with the Lord to give guidance to you and to stand alongside of you. And that calls for a conversation where there's listening, there's asking, there's probing, there's caloric, there's an adrenaline rush, Your endorphins are moving, and you become excited about this relationship that you have with God. And secondly, you know that you are in conversation with Him when you're in the presence of peace. That's a coolness that is there when you're in the presence of God, when you are engaging with Him. And joy. Not happiness. Not a hit that immediately satisfies a need, but a sense of long, sense of fulfillment, well-being, enjoying time. And now you know that you are in the presence of God. So we're going to take away 5 suggestions to you today on how you can know that you are really God's voice and really grow over the rest of your life into developing that intimate relationship with Him. And the first one that I was really covering is this: to anticipate and expect to encounter God and hear His voice throughout the day. Secondly, learn how God communicates with other people in the Old Testament and the New Testament and with people that you know. To learn what methods He is using to communicate and talk with them or express His voice to them. Third, as you see, to encounter God frequently during the day to learn how He interacts explicitly, especially with you. Fourth, something I struggled with, to engage in sacred silence. To set aside time to listen and just to be in His presence, rather than to fill it with words. And finally, especially in difficult times, to test what we believe is God's message, His voice to us, against other spiritually gifted people who are gifted with the gift of knowledge and with spiritual fulfillment. To go to members of the congregation with the questions that you have and ask them to be in prayer, to present your case before the Lord, independent of you. I'll share a little bit more about how the Quakers do that and make that a part of the church life in just a little bit. Well, let's begin with this first one then. How do we go about anticipating and expecting to encounter God and hear His voice throughout the day? What I'll call spiritual serendipity, where we find the Holy Spirit alive and active something, and we step into that. And if we aren't aware of that, we aren't looking forward to that, then we're going to miss it. We'll just walk through that experience. I'd like you to imagine for a minute, maybe you prefer to be doing this right now, driving up north to Mackinac Island. And let's say it's 8 a.m. We got up in the morning this morning to take a whole couple of days there on the island to enjoy the sight and the sound and the words of God and so forth. And as you're driving up 75, the stories whiz by, they're like a blur. You're listening to a broadcast or a podcast. Maybe the driver's singing, whatever it is, or you're in deep conversation. But there are things going on outside of you just going like a whiz. You don't even recognize it. Until about 11:30. And there your stomach starts growling. What happens next? Well, you become much more aware of the side of the rail. You're starting to look for what? Yeah, that's right. Something that says, let's satisfy that particular need. Let's stuff ourselves with something that really looks good. And so you find restaurants, you find signs for them, you look for food, you look for snacks, anything to satisfy that. And lo, here you see Burdick's Substack along the side. That's an amazing thing, and it's sort of like free at last. But that's right. So you begin to then get out of the car, you go on over, and you stuff yourself with fudge, and it's a momentary satisfaction. It's called satisfaction. It's just temporary. You stuff your face, get in the car, and you get up again. But the hunger comes back again. So I would like us to think about anticipating God's presence in our lives daily as this is a metaphor, that we are constantly hungry and looking for God's presence, God's engagement with us every moment of the day, and we will find it. And those are the quiet, small times in life that He wants to engage us, to build this relationship of trust, to identify His voice from everything else, to express to us how He prefers to communicate with you and me uniquely, specifically, especially. And so I would simply ask you, how often then are we missing these opportunities to engage with God in the silence of the moment every day, and to employ much like we would stopping up and having some subject to focus on. So can you develop a hunger for communicating with God? Can you seek out and find the spiritual serendipities that are around you in listening to the conversations of other people, witnessing of their experiences, much like this today? Isn't it great to imagine the presence around that woman was revealing her faith and asking the questions? Yeah. Those are the moments we're looking for. Oftentimes, God is present when we are broken, when we are crushed. Death in our families, the loss of a job, a marriage that's split and broken. We're ready, and we're in thirst. And if you think back to the prophets of the messages that they had with God, when you read about them, they're the same kind of messages, but they are couched in a lifetime of having had these conversations with God all along. They are ready. Typically, in the crisis that we experience, we're tense, we're anxious, we're distressed, and we're not particularly open to receive totally the message that God has to say to us, to speak to us. And we're not ready, we're not very good under pressure, under our worst times of our life, to engage God in conversation. So it calls for us to have this continuous engagement with God in a conversational mode throughout the rest of our lives. And so my exhortation today is stay in the moment with God. Take every moment to find out how He is expressing Himself to you in many different ways. So brokenness is one way that He gets our attention. I think as you heard a story from me some years ago, after a significant boat explosion and fire, I spent 10 years in PTSD services. And it was 10 years of silence, absolute powerlessness to care for myself. And it was a mild brokenness time when the Lord showed me His face when I finally heard His voice after 50 years of living and to differentiate it. Not because He was speaking to me, but it was in His silence. It was teaching me patience, a tender heart towards Him and the people around me, a desire to be in His presence, because I could not care for myself. And so those moments of crisis that we have, those brokenness moments, may be wonderful moments where God will guide us and have our attention, so we can truly listen to who He is, how He speaks, and what His character is. Moses was one of my favorite folks who spent how many years in the desert before he set Israel free? 40 years. Now, what's interesting about that story is there's next to no information about how God encountered Moses. Have any of you spent time in that desert, Midian desert? I haven't. But I can't imagine 120 degrees every day, not just Los Angeles during the summer. I can't imagine how dry it is, how empty it is, how crowded it is, how no amount of shade is available to cool me off. And that's the environment that God put Moses in for 40 years. One of them. To remind him to grow dependency on Him, God, to be able to listen to His voice and differentiate it from all the fleeting birds that he was going to get from his father-in-law, whose feet he was taking care of, and then also then to go away from impulsiveness. I think of Moses much like I think of Peter as a very impulsive person. We act kill a person out of impulsive and he did me in the grounds of the desert for that reason. God said, I have a plan for you to lead. I want you to lead, but to do that, you need to set aside impulsiveness and allow me to work through you. For that whole period of silence, of God's voice, I'm communicating with the Spirit of Moses on how to behave. And it may be that God's greatest hope is silence. That's one way. Now, I'd like to suggest then to look at other people besides ourselves on how God communicates. And think about the variety of ways. And in the New Testament, for instance, when Jesus was baptized, God spoke. Do you remember how he spoke? People heard it as thunder. How about that? How many times have you been in God's presence and he announced his presence with thunder? But he does. In another sense, he spoke with Elijah in a still small voice. Lightning, thunder, earthquakes were all around Elijah, but he could only hear that in a still small voice. A quiet whisper. Just not a whisper to you. And he remembered. Miracles are a way that God expresses himself. Wonders, visions, dreams. We'll talk a little bit about how Paul interpreted as we have lesson 10 here. Not only by himself, but he also asked strong brothers and sisters to pray over that dream and help him understand what he was to do. So he went to the people that he knew and sought their community support or guidance in terms of interpreting that dream. That is a biblical tool as well. I think of Samuel. Remember that story of Samuel when he heard God's voice 3 times and he mistook it? He didn't get it. And he went to his friend Eli, the priest, and said, what is it? And he said, go back to sleep. That's all. Go back to sleep. 3 times he did that. So he didn't hear his sense of his voice, but he began to recognize this is how God is talking to me. We talked about Elijah before, and you remember in that story where he asked God to kill him. He says, I'm the last of the prophets. I have been chased down by Jezebel and by Ahab, and they're after my life. I'm tired of this king. Just do me in. I'm old. I'm in my 80s. And what does God say to him? Take a nap. So he said, by the way, and he provided a sleeping mat for him, and also fed him. And the angel gave him food. It wasn't much, but some water and some bread, and he slept like a baby. He woke up, and he complained some more, and so God said, take another nap. And so 3 times, God's telling to him, in that voice that he recognized right away, to say to him, I'm listening. I attend to you. I will offer you relief. Now, one last time, I think, is, he says, I'm allowed one of these little ones of these prophets, and there's nobody behind me. And God says to him, I want you to take a walk and you're going to run into another person whose name is Elijah. He is the person who is replacing it. I want to take you through that. I want to hear and know God. And so that encounter is much like the encounter that we can have with the Lord as well. I'd like you to think of one more person, one of my favorite characters, and that is Nehemiah. I love Nehemiah because it's only 13 chapters long, but it's probably the best story of a leader, manager, that there is in the Old Testament. And I'd ask you to read this. This is all I'm not coming back next week to check. So you don't have to, you can ignore it. That's a great story. Nehemiah, as you remember, was an old guy who was about 80 years old. He had spent quite a bit of time in Jerusalem, and he was in the office of Artaxerxes, and I know you will say that 3 times, Artaxerxes. The Assyrian king who actually contributed to the demolishing of the Jerusalem walls. And he had heard that these walls were down and that the people of Jerusalem were unsafe. Their homes were being raided by nomadic tribes and so forth. And he had parts of that. And for 6 months, Nehemiah prayed about what to do, if anything that he could do. And so the first chapter of Nehemiah is a message about that prayer. Now, what's interesting about the prayer to me, and the thing that I like you to remember, is that he reminds God of his promises to the people of Israel. He tells them in there, hey, these folks are straightening up. You know, you punished them, and they were sent off to slavery in Babylon and so forth, but they're not like that. They're in trouble, and you promised them to take care of them. Can you imagine in your prayer life making no kind of statement to God? You owe those people something. And that's the kind of engagement that God wants to have with you and me. Such that I can be audacious, I can be bold, bodacious, if you will, in stepping into God's presence and saying, hey, we got needs and we need a solution to this. What I love with this, too, is that the very last words of Nehemiah in that first chapter are, make me successful in the presence of this man being the king. Old Nehemiah was the cupbearer of the king. That is to say, he was the first, the right-hand man of the king. The king came to him for counsel on everything. But in order for him to be helpful in Jerusalem, he had to take it to battle. So his big problem was, how did he get the needs from the king? And that's the prayer. Notice he doesn't ask, I need 10 things, and I need it now, God, and I need action. But in the second chapter, the king bumps into him, and of course he says, Lee, you're not looking good. You know, your face is down, you're slumped over, you have a stage for a while, you're a little sloppy, what's going on? And Lee says, I don't know. I need your help. And before the words come out of his mouth, God is acting through that king who says, I will help you. You've got concerns about the walls of Jerusalem. I'll provide for the soldiers. I'll lead you to the materials that you need. All I need is lead. You see how that works in that relationship between chapter 1 and chapter 2. He's not speaking to Nehemiah, he's showing them through his actions, because he took them in and that he was acting on his behalf. That's what he is doing with us as well. It's a great story. I'd like to share with you another story of a contender of mine by the name of Harry Andrews. This man had been an artist with Ford Motor, in which he took renderings. He could reproduce the automobile in such detail and clarity that it looked exactly like a photograph. This was in the 50s and 60s. Some of you are old enough to appreciate what that is. He would spend $100 or so just on doing one of those. Showed it to a boss one day, and the boss said, no, that isn't it. You missed it. And he missed it. I was sure that he get transparent. It was then that Harry decided to change jobs. And over that time, Harry became one of the top natural discoverers in the world. A high school educated man who needed to move away from that, certainly, and into some of the great success. Harry was so successful, he would sell his paintings at $1,000 a square inch. And these paintings were quite large. If not, he didn't seem to be wealthy. He just was so good that people bought this all over the world. And that's part of the background, because things changed dramatically for Harry in the moment that I want to up to now. When Harry was in his studio, he would talk to me. I would meet with him, I was writing some books then, and he would describe spending a couple of hours listening to a guy by the name of Ray Vernon McGee, and then drinking that in, and then spending another couple of hours on Bible study himself, and a couple more hours during the day in prayer and just the meditation itself. He had a rich life. High school educated guy that knew more about the Bible than most preachers I've ever worked with. And he grew into the spiritual gift of prophecy, of teaching, and words of knowledge. And then we use those spiritual gifts. After a church service in Oakland, we both attended it, and he walked out ahead of me. And after the service, he called me and said, "Did you see this hand and this arm reaching out in the middle of nowhere as I was looking at a visit?" And I said, "Oh, no, I didn't." He said, "I did, and I'm not sure what that means. Pray about this to me." He was using me as another approach to check out what he was taking in. And so we both did, and over the next couple of days, the Lord revealed to him that he wanted Larry to change and move away from painting animals to painting the life of Christ for the next 12 years. So out of that image came this picture. This was the very first painting that he did. And God revealed his painting to Harry over a number of weeks, maybe even months. The painting isn't that large, it's probably about 4 by 5 feet. And Harry protested when God gave him the assignment because he said, "I'm a sinner and feathers person. I don't want to paint people. I've never painted another human." And God said, "I'll take care of that. Do what I want you to do." Now, this is Harry. Harry is communicating this to me because he is in long-term conversation with God every day. He dreams about God at night. He sees him in his bedroom talking with him. Those are the very encounters that God can have and wants to have with you, so that you are accustomed to hearing his voice when you say, "I'd like you to do something way out of your comfort zone." And trust that that's God speaking. So here's Harry trying to talk and paint humans when we never did this before. Hi, why? Well, the arm up there belongs to one person of our congregation. The hand belongs to Ken. And the face belongs to Paul, who was the interim pastor at the congregation that we're members of. That's how Harry began to paint. I got in a couple of them only because I was kind of face, and it's great to paint, so I got to be Peter in a number of those paintings. But the point I'm getting at is that here's an encounter live between Harry and a simple man who's regularly engaging with God every day, recognizing his voice, and sets aside a multi-million-dollar income to do something that God is going to reveal over the next 12 years. Every year, God showed him what the next painting would look like. Some of these paintings were 8 by 12 feet, others were 9 by 10, and so forth. They're really quite large. They were all designed to take on a tour all together and go from church to church and communicating with Jesus' story through images like this, rather than through words like that. And that was what God very revealed to him to do. And he obeyed that. He lost money. For 12 years, he had no income. And yet, he stayed steady because he trusted that God was showing them every year what their emergence picture would look like. So that was the crucifixion, as an example, one of the beginnings of Harry's interactions, encounters with God. The third thing I'd like you to remember is that we encounter God frequently during the day to learn how God interacts with us explicitly. And do you know how God communicates with you? Are you comfortable with that? Are you certain of that? If you don't recognize his voice now, as he's maybe saying over the months, is that Jesus talking to you? Anyway, where I'm going with that is that our encounters are going to be essential to build up a relationship so that we can be turning his voice for everything else. I talked about Nehemiah, I talked about Elijah as illustrations of that, and how God encounters us not only through words, silence is another form of it, and then immediately upon our engagement with him. Look for those. The other element I'd like to share with you is this notion of sacred silence. That's not silence. Yes, prayers to me have always been talk, and no time to pause and listen to him. And that's what he's been telling me over these last years. Moving from urgency rather than importance. I'm thinking of our friend Moses and how many years, 40 years, that God took to get him to pay attention. Are you in the university experience now? Is he trying to communicate with you over these years about certain patterns in your life and wanting your changes to be totally dependent on him to show you what those changes might be? Has God been giving you a double university education, or even a little bit today? The temptation is to ditch those situations, to put away the humility, the embarrassment of them, charged by the silence, by the inactivity rather than the activity that we oftentimes find ourselves stepping into, so we don't have to address the issues in our life that God wants to put out to us. I would like to offer you then a solution here about how to build up a deeper relationship with God. And it's called Lectio Divina. And it's two words in a phrase. The words aren't necessary, but the action is. I have found as I began to practice this and coming into a deeper relationship with God, I can hear His voice. I can see Him active in my life. The first step in Lectio Divina is choosing a scripture to read and to become deeply involved or engaged in it. For instance, I like to read the story of Elijah while he's being confronted by the army, and he's surrounded and he has servants. It's very dramatic. And you remember the story how it is that Elijah says it's the army of God that is out there and it's greater than they are, and they are his servants. That's what I think. But you might want to pick something like this as a way of learning about how God ends. The second thing that you're doing then is reading the whole thing and listening with your heart rather than with your ears alone to what's going on there. Pick a phrase, pick some words in that, in the reading that you're doing, and detail the story that stimulates you. What stands out to you is what's coming to mind. Where do you find yourself in the story? Are you one of the soldiers in this case? Are you like out of the servant? You're not yourself. You're to be putting yourself in it to get the experience of it, to immerse yourself in Scripture, if you will. Second, then, is to reflect. What's going on here? Why does the word or phrase stand out to you? How does it feel to be the person or the object that you selected? What are you thinking about God at this time? Give an exercise of 3 minutes to ponder all of us and ask God, how does this connect with my life today? What do I need to know in terms of what's happening at this time? The third thing I ask you to do is to respond, or to pray. Read the words. And then using those words, present yourself to God, not as a shopping list, not as though you're going to the butcher asking for a piece of meat, or going to the Wizard of Oz and asking for a way home. It's simply saying to God, please reveal yourself to me. I'm yours. I need you. So pray whatever you need to say, thanks, action, praise, and rest. Take time to receive what the Lord is now about to reveal to you. Wait on Him. Pay attention to God in this period. How does He seem to be operating in a passage that you just read? For the servant, for Elijah, even for the Syrian family. What about God in this case makes you want to worship and glorify Him, to praise Him and give thanks to Him? Well, let's go to England, and I'd like you to consider practicing those few steps. And if you don't remember those today, but anyone send it as a reminder that we are there. So in conclusion, Yes, it's a few minutes, and thank you for bearing with me here. You get to know about God's voice and to distinguish it because they're continuous daily billions of their faces that you're undertaking. If you go back to Nehemiah and read the other 12 chapters, you will find that the whole story is peppered with his doubting how he was God, asking questions, thanking God, inquiring, and the like. It's the reason that he was successful in rebuilding the Jerusalem wall in record time. Remember though that God and I's prayer with God is really an expression of people, two individuals that have mutual interest, that have mutual attraction, mutual respect, and mutual listening. And our ears listen as much as we want to listen as well. Psalm 32:9 says, "Do not be like a horse or a mule without understanding, whose supper might be curbed with bit and bridle." That is not God. He is not putting a bit and bridle and leading you away. His interaction with you is counsel, standing alongside of you and showing you and giving you the freedom to act as you wish. God speaks with us to give us over time to want to interact with him as Jesus was interacted as well. And so in conclusion, hearing God's voice is a real blessing, and something that you and I can choose to do regularly and not just periodically. I'd like to close then with another statement that Amy Carmichael made, and I'm going to ask him to finish with that. It's her struggle for her whole life is listening to to God, mercy and his care.
Blessed are the single-hearted, for they shall enjoy much peace. If you refuse to be heard and thanked, if you stay your soul unburied, nothing can keep you from that clearness of spirit which is life and peace. In that stillness, you will know what his will is.
And then you have a peaceful and filled with the joy of the Lord as you present at your life. So in peace.
Thank you for listening. If you would like to support Community Bible Church, we would appreciate your prayers and gifts. We can be reached at Community Bible Church, 1888 Crescent Lake Road, Waterford, Michigan, 48327, or at our website, www.cbcmi.com. We'd appreciate your gifts. We know that many can't give right now, so if you would, you'd be a great blessing to your brothers and sisters. God bless you. Have a great day.